Unfortunate, and we wanted to leave it. We'd set up a Korean government through the United Nations. Not a very satisfactory situation with the country still divided and so on. But if we can, let's get out and pay attention to Europe, which is what America wanted to do anyway. Let the dust settle in Asia.
But America was involved in Asia, and the dust there was red.
As news comes of Britain's recognition of the Chinese Communist government, pictures from the Indo-China border tell of the complete rout of the Nationalist Army.
The Communists were victorious in China with a series of sweeping victories in 1949. America's ally in China, the Kuomintang, was beaten.
A monster rally in Shanghai celebrates communism's greatest victory since the coup in Czechoslovakia.
As the Communists took the whole of the mainland, the American right became fixated on who lost China. Chiang Kai-shek fled to Formosa. Asia, rather than Europe, became the center of American political debate. Acheson recast his Asia policy in late 1949. Policy on China seemed to be clear.
The United States of America is not going to quibble about the integrity of its position. As the President has stated, we are not going to use our forces in connection with the present situation in Formosa. We are not going to attempt to seize the island. We are not going to get involved militarily in any way on the island of Formosa.
But policy on Korea was not settled. In January 1950, Acheson outlined a two-tier strategic approach at the press club.
Dean Acheson's press club speech was very important, not so much for what it exactly said, but how it was interpreted. Well, he described our defense perimeter in the Pacific, and he left Korea out of that perimeter. He did add that for areas beyond this line, resort must be had to the United Nations, and the experience has been that that is not a weak reed upon which to lean. But nevertheless, his speech was widely interpreted as writing off Korea.
This Acheson speech was exactly like Hitler's contention that he wanted peace. It was all deception, and the leadership in North Korea was fully aware of this. The South Korean army couldn't mobilize without the permission of the USA, and was entirely dependent on them for ammunition and fuel.
North Korea was now well supplied with Soviet T-34 tanks. It had a well-trained army, augmented by 60,000 veterans who had fought in the Chinese Civil War. By 1950, the Northern Army was larger, though both could call an equivalent manpower. The North had tanks and fighter planes, but the Southern Army and police had greatly expanded with US advisors and Korean officers from the old Japanese Army. Preparations intensified on both sides of the 38th parallel.
We in Pyongyang came to notice the possibility of war. I cannot say exactly what time, but probably sometime late in 1949 or early 1950. And I happened to live in the neighborhood of one of those centers, therefore we could see that great deal of mobilization was going on. And these led us to believe that some great event was going to happen.
Então eu estou dizendo, repetindo novamente, 48 já começava transportes de canhões, armas.
The North was prepared, as I said, from 1948 onwards. There were trucks with big guns moving about, arms, everything. Anyone could understand what was going on.
Ninguém percebeu. Talvez
Maybe the South Korean military knew what was happening in the North, but the people of South Korea were caught by surprise.
In Japan, General MacArthur argued, like the American right, that the focus of the struggle between East and West was in Asia, not Europe, and that the time had come to contain and maybe roll back the tide, including rehabilitating Japan. In February 1950, Kim Il-sung's giant neighbors, China and Russia, signed their own treaty in Moscow. The communists feared a revived Japan. To the West, it looked a menacing coalition. In reality, Stalin had forced the treaty on an angry but aloof Mao. Mao's first need was to rebuild China. The anti-communists were also clustering together. MacArthur began to take more interest in Korea. Rhee became a welcome visitor to Tokyo. Washington threatened to cut vital aid unless he reformed. It pressed for fresh elections, again with a few UN observers.
We were there to supervise the elections, which we did, and they ran, in my opinion, very well. Tremendous response, particularly women, and I think they got about 90% response to their voluntary voting. There was some trouble. There was some people came down from, I think, Chirisan and killed a few policemen, and I think a few others were taken off by the guerrillas, but apart from that, it was a very well-run election. I think there were about 30-odd candidates. Some of them were in jail, and some were voted in whilst they were in jail.
There now arrived in Korea John Foster Dulles, a Republican, recruited by Truman as special envoy to deal with East Asian questions. Dulles arrived on June the 17th. Rhee was weakened by his setback in the May elections. He hoped that Dulles could bolster his position. Dulles went up to the 38th parallel. The North Koreans made much propaganda use of the visit then and since.
It seems unfortunate that when he went up to this spot near Acheson to look at the parallel, he should have been photographed in that position that we saw in so many papers. Because the Commission itself had been to that point. We were told that would be a good point to go to if we wanted to verify with our own eyes the site of the pillboxes on the North Korean side and that sort of thing, and get a feeling of the tension that was there. Not even the peasants were working.
Back in Seoul, Dulles spoke in the National Assembly. He told Rhee he was not alone. Australian delegate Arthur Jameson dined with them that night.
He used that dinner to try and get a statement from Dulles, Senator Dulles, as to what the American reaction would be if there were an invasion of South Korea. And in various ways, he was a very persistent man, very intelligent. He came at this question from various angles throughout the course of the evening, trying to get Dulles to say something that could be regarded obviously as a commitment. And he didn't get it.
Dulles went on to Tokyo to confer with MacArthur about a Japanese peace treaty. Reports on what he agreed to in Korea conflict. He did not seem unduly alarmed. In June, 2 Australian UN field observers inspected the 38th parallel on the southern side to check on any preparations for war. They made a 9-day tour in the company of South Korean officials.
There was talk amongst some junior officers that they wanted to go belting north to get this thing over, but we could find nothing more than just that attitude. We didn't see any concentration of troops anywhere. We didn't see any concentration of stores, equipment, guns, ammunition, food. Nothing was stored forward. And they were very limited in the guns. They didn't have any heavy artillery. The Americans had kept them well under control, and they weren't armed for an invasion.
Starting with an artillery barrage on the Ongjin Peninsula in the west, fighting broke out sometime in the early morning of June the 25th. There followed a general invasion with infantry and tanks. But the North Koreans claimed then and since that they had been taken by surprise.
Quite honestly, at the time, I thought it was another of the enemy's large-scale provocations. As yet, I did not know it was going to be all-out war. While I was thinking it was just another armed incursion, there came the order from our superiors to counterattack. Only then did I realize that the enemy had started the war throughout Korea. That was how I felt.
The Southern Army was confronted by tanks, but had not placed its anti-tank mines.
On the east side of our division, the 13th Regiment was challenged. The T-34 was the tank which had been used by the Soviet Union during the